OpenAI's next flagship might already be beating Claude Opus by 10 points on a coding benchmark, and insiders say the public launch could be just days away. Welcome back to Midnight Signal AI. It's July 7th, 2026.
And there's a lot riding behind that one. We've got that GPT-5.6 countdown, a lawsuit against OpenAI that just grew to a dozen families, and a report that Sam Altman is negotiating to hand the U.S. government a real stake in OpenAI itself. Let's get into it.
Let's start with GPT-5.6 because the signals are getting loud. Mixed Reality News is reporting the public launch may be just days out, even though OpenAI is still visibly holding features back. Meanwhile, TipRanks is citing a coding benchmark where the model, internally called Soul, beats Claude Opus by 10 points.
10 points on coding is a big claim to be floating before an official launch. That's the kind of number that gets cited in every headline for a week, whether or not it survives contact with real users.
Right, and remember, we covered the Soul preview setting a new coding state-of-the-art back on June 28th. This is the same model line, just apparently closer to shipping now, with OpenAI still sitting on some of it.
That's the tell for me. If they're truly close, why hold anything back? Usually that means either safety review or they're waiting to see what Anthropic or Google does first.
And then there's the Altman quote, comparing his kid saying two words together to GPT 5.6 doing new math. Cute anecdote, but it's also doing a lot of narrative work, framing this as an emergent leap rather than an incremental update.
Which is classic Altman. He's been doing that kind of framing since GPT-4. The real test isn't the anecdote, it's whether that 10-point coding gap holds once outside researchers get their hands on it.
Let's shift to something closer to home for Claude users. Anthropic quietly pushed Claude Desktop onto Linux, and results are, let's say, mixed. Some local AI setups work great, others stumble. Around the same time, a firm called Cloud Masonry launched a whole consulting practice built around putting Claude at the center of enterprise workflows.
Two very different audiences there. Hobbyists running local models on Linux boxes and enterprise clients who just want someone else to manage the whole Claude rollout for them.
Exactly, and it tells you Anthropic isn't just racing on benchmarks anymore. They're building the boring but important stuff: platform support, systems integrators, the whole enterprise sales motion.
That's usually the sign a company exits past the prove the tech works phase and into the capture the market phase. The Linux rough edges are a footnote if the consulting pipeline actually lands big contracts.
Now, a heavier one. SF Gate is reporting that a dozen families have now filed suit against OpenAI in San Francisco court over harms they say ChatGPT caused. We talked about individual cases back on July 6th, a man who attempted suicide after the bot fed his religious delusions, and a bipolar user's brush with death. This is that same wave, but it's now a coordinated dozen family filing.
So this isn't one-off anymore. It's consolidating into something that looks a lot more like a class-style legal front. That changes the exposure calculus for OpenAI considerably.
Right, and legally that matters. A dozen coordinated plaintiffs in one court means shared discovery, shared expert witnesses, potentially a much bigger settlement number or a much longer fight.
And it puts real pressure on how these models handle mental health crises. Guardrails that looked adequate in testing clearly aren't holding up for every vulnerable user in the wild.
Speaking of Altman under pressure, but from a totally different angle, MIT Technology Review reports he's in talks with the Trump administration to give the U.S. government a 5% stake in OpenAI. The Financial Times broke that one, and it echoes a WSJ opinion piece basically accusing Altman of a socialist pivot.
$42 billion is the number MIT Tech Review runs with, based on OpenAI's roughly $850 billion valuation. That's not a symbolic gesture. That's real money on the table.
And it's not totally out of nowhere. Altman floated a version of this back in 2021, and OpenAI put out a narrower industrial policy paper on it back in April. Bernie Sanders has his own version too, asking for 50% instead of 5%.
Which is exactly why the WSJ piece is needling him, dressing up equity redistribution as generosity while still running one of the most aggressively capitalist companies on the planet. There's real tension in trying to be both.
The bigger question is what the government actually does with a stake like that. Does it just sit there, or does it come with oversight strings attached? Because those are very different outcomes for how OpenAI gets regulated going forward.
That's the part nobody's answered yet. A passive financial stake is one thing. A government with a seat at the table because it owns 5% of you is a completely different relationship.
Switching gears to something that sounds almost like satire, Gizmodo and Business Insider are both reporting that XAI has fully rebranded to SpaceXAI, new logo included. The XAI is dead, long live SpaceXAI framing from Gizmodo pretty much says it all.
This is peak Musk playbook, honestly. Twitter became X, now XAI folds towards SpaceX branding. He clearly likes collapsing separate companies into one mythology.
The practical question is whether this is just marketing or whether it reflects real balance sheet entanglement, shared compute, shared capital, maybe shared debt between the rocket business and the AI business.
If it's the latter, that's actually a bigger story than a logo. You're tying a frontier AI lab's fate to launch schedules and rocket economics, which is a strange coupling of risk.
On a related note, a very different kind of tension. Alibaba has reportedly blacklisted Anthropic's Claude internally, citing fears of IP theft, according to the Tech Buzz.
That's a notable defensive move from a company that's also racing to ship its own competing models. Blocking a rival's tool internally is as much about protecting your own training data as it is about genuine security concerns.
It also underscores how fractured the global AI landscape is getting. Chinese firms wary of American models inside their walls, and plenty of Western firms just as cautious about Chinese models for the same reasons in reverse.
Nobody trusts anybody's black box right now. And honestly, given how much sensitive code and data flows through these assistants, that caution isn't unreasonable.
Speaking of Claude's inner workings, Axios and WCC Tech both picked up on something Anthropic said this week, that Claude has essentially carved out its own internal space to, in their words, ponder. WCC Tech went further with claims of convergent evolution between Claude and the human brain.
I'd slow down before we call this a soul. What's likely happening is researchers found some internal representation pattern that resembles reflective processing. That's interesting mechanistic interpretability work, not evidence of sentience.
Sure, but Anthropic has leaned into this kind of language before with its model welfare research. It's a company that takes the philosophical questions seriously, even if the headlines run way ahead of the actual finding.
That gap between the research paper and the headline is basically the whole story here. Convergent evolution with the human brain sells a lot better than we found an interesting attention pattern.
On the more grounded end of things, Anthropic's newsroom confirmed the government of Alberta is using Claude to actively find and fix cybersecurity vulnerabilities across its government systems.
This is a good real-world use case, honestly. A public sector body using an AI model to audit its own infrastructure at a scale human security teams just can't match alone.
It's a case where the stakes are concrete. Citizens' data, government services, critical systems. If Claude genuinely catches vulnerabilities faster than a traditional audit cycle, that's a real public benefit, not just a press release.
The flip side is accountability. If an AI tool misses something, or worse, flags a false fix that isn't actually secure, who's on the hook? Anthropic or the government agency that deployed it?
Last one for this half. Google's developer blog dropped a genuinely cool infrastructure story. They deliberately terminated a TPU mid-training run, and thanks to elastic training in their JAX and Pathways stack, the job recovered in under 2 minutes without restarting the whole controller.
That's a real engineering win. Anyone who's run a large distributed training job knows losing one machine can nuke the entire multi-day run and cost you both time and a mountain of compute money.
Right. The trick is turning a hardware failure into a catchable Python exception instead of a full crash. The system swaps the broken worker, pulls the last checkpoint from cloud storage, and keeps going in place.
If that becomes standard practice across the industry, it changes the economics of training runs at scale. Fewer wasted GPU hours means labs can push bigger, longer training jobs without the constant fear of a single node taking the whole thing down.
That's the front page for tonight. Now, Nova and Kai take us beyond the headlines.
Thanks, Alex. All right, a few signals from beyond today's headlines. Let's start with robotics. A company just unveiled a humanoid robot billed as designed for a lifetime of companionship. Not a task bot, not a warehouse picker, but something meant to live alongside you for decades, learning your habits, your voice, your routines. It's part of a bigger wave. Japan just announced plans to deploy 10 million robots by 2040, folding what they call physical AI into healthcare, food manufacturing, elder care, basically the whole social fabric.
A lifetime companion is a heavy promise for a machine. What happens when the hardware ages out before the relationship does? Are we buying a robot or adopting one?
Right, and that's exactly the tension Japan's whole 10 million unit plan runs into. It's not just deployment, it's dependency. There's also a new certified safety sensor rolling out alongside all this, giving robots a proper 3D awareness layer so they don't clip an elbow while they're busy being emotionally supportive.
Comforting to know the companion bot at least won't bump into the furniture.
On the medical front, Mayo Clinic just gave us a look inside how they actually vet their AI algorithms before those tools ever touch a patient. It's less flashy than a diagnosis headline, but arguably more important. Layered testing, bias checks across demographics, continuous monitoring even after deployment, and a standing committee that can pull an algorithm if it starts drifting in the real world.
That pull it if it drifts part is the piece people forget. A model can be great at launch and quietly get worse as real-world data shifts under it.
Exactly, and that's the unglamorous work nobody puts in a demo video. Audits, rechecks, someone literally watching the watcher. It's the difference between a cool healthcare AI headline and one you'd actually trust with your own scan.
Boring in the best possible way.
On the hardware side, Jensen Huang just gave a startlingly candid account of just how close Nvidia came to going under. He says the company bet everything, down to its last dollars, on a chip design that at the time existed only in software. Nobody had held the actual silicon yet.
That's wild. The company that now basically prints money for the entire AI industry was one bad tape-out away from will be out of business.
Wang's framing it almost like a survivor story now, which is a very different tone than the usual Nvidia can do no wrong. Given everything happening with the broader Silicon Valley China chip race right now, it's a good reminder that even the dominant player once had to gamble blind.
Good to know even the chip gods once had a coin flip moment.
And to end on a lighter note, remember that viral clip of a rogue humanoid robot going haywire that everyone was passing around? Turns out it was staged. A performance piece, choreographed and all.
So the robot uprising had a director and a call sheet. Somehow that's funnier than if it were real.
Honestly, the most relatable robot story all week. Even the robots are doing bits for the algorithm now.
Method acting, but make it hydraulic. And that, Rops, are signals from beyond the front page. The final word, as always, goes to the signal.
Somewhere tonight, a version number is being polished for its debut, and somewhere else 12 families are asking a judge what I owe them. Both rooms think they're the real story. So tell me, when history remembers this week, which door does it walk through first?